Richard Elmira thought he committed the perfect betrayal. He had the money, the power, and the young mistress waiting in the wings. On a rainy Tuesday he looked his loyal wife of 15 years in the eye and told her she was expired goods. He expected her to cry. He expected her to beg. But Catherine Elmira didn't shed a tear. She just smiled a smile that should have terrified him. 24 hours later, Catherine vanished. No note. No trace. Just an empty house and a secret from Richard's past that could bury him alive. But as the police close in, one question remains. Is Catherine Elmira a victim, or is she the most dangerous woman Richard has ever met? This isn't a story about a breakup. It's a story about a trap, and the door just locked. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the dirt slicker. That's what Richard Elmira used to say anyway. Richard was a man who appreciated structure. As one of the city's most sought-after residential architects, he built glass houses for tech millionaires' structures that were transparent, imposing, and cold, just like him. He lived in one of his own designs in Bellevue, a sprawling modern masterpiece of steel and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington. It was a house that demanded you look at it, but offered no privacy to the people inside. On a Tuesday in November, the atmosphere inside the Elmira residence was suffocating. Catherine Elmira, Richard's wife of 15 years, sat at the long mahogany dining table. She was 42, though she often looked younger. With pale skin and dark hair she kept pulled back in a severe, sensible bun. She was looking at a bank statement, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She wasn't stupid. That was the thing Richard always forgot. He mistook her quietness for ignorance, and her patience for submission. "Dinner is cold," Catherine said softly, not looking up from the paper. Richard walked in from the garage, smelling of rain and expensive cologne, Santal 33, a scent Catherine hadn't bought him. He loosened his tie, not bothering to look at her. "I had a late meeting with the investors for the Skyline project. I told you not to wait." "The Skyline investors meet on Thursdays. Richard," she replied, finally looking up. Her eyes were grey, unreadable, and they certainly don't meet at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Richard froze halfway to the liquor cabinet. He turned slowly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Check my location history now. Are we that beneath you, Catherine?" "I didn't check your phone," she said, tapping the paper on the table. "I checked the credit card, the joint one. You charged room service. Champagne and oysters at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday." Richard sighed a sound of heavy, exaggerated exhaustion. He poured himself a scotch neat. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed, like a parent whose child had found the Christmas presents early. "Her name is Jessica," Richard said. He took a sip, the amber liquid burning his throat. He turned to face his wife, leaning back against the marble counter. "Since we're doing this now, her name is Jessica Marrow. She's 26. She's an interior designer at the firm." Catherine didn't scream. She didn't throw the vase of white lilies sitting on the table. She just folded her hands. "I know who she is. I met her at the Christmas party last year. The one who spilled red wine on my dress and didn't apologize." She was nervous. Richard defended his voice, rising slightly. "She respects you." "She's sleeping with my husband," Catherine stated flatly. "I doubt respect is high on her list of virtues." "It's not just sleeping, Catherine." Richard put the glass down. This was it, the moment he had been rehearsing in his head for 6 months. He had talked it over with Jessica in that hotel room just hours ago. "Just tell her, Richard. Rip the Band-Aid off. We can't keep living in the shadows. I want to wake up next to you every day." "I'm in love with her," Richard said. The words hung in the air, heavy and brutal. Catherine flinched. It was a small movement, barely a tremble of her shoulders, but it was the first crack in her armor. 15 years, Richard. We built this life. We survived the miscarriage. We survived your bankruptcy in 2018. I stood by you when your own brother wouldn't speak to you. And I'm grateful, Richard said, checking his watch. He actually checked his watch. But gratitude isn't love, Kat. I'm dying in this house. I feel stifled. With Jessica, I feel alive. She has energy. She has vision. She has youth, Catherine corrected. And she has no idea who you really are. I'm leaving, Richard blurted out. I didn't want to do it tonight. But since you brought it up, I'm done. I'm moving into the condo downtown. Jessica is meeting me there. He waited for the explosion. He was ready for her to beg, to cry, to threaten to take half his money. He had already spoken to his lawyer, Bianca Pri, about hiding assets in offshore accounts in the Caymans. He was ready for a war. But Catherine just stood up. She smoothed the front of her grey cardigan. She walked over to the window and looked out at the dark, churning water of the lake. You're choosing her, Catherine whispered. Final answer. Yes, Richard said, emboldened by her passivity. I choose her. Catherine turned around. A strange, sad smile played on her lips. It wasn't the smile of a defeated woman. It was the smile of someone who had just heard the punchline to a very long, very cruel joke. All right, Richard, she said softly. You go to your condo. You go to Jessica. But remember this moment. Remember that I gave you a chance to stop. I don't need your permission, Richard snapped. He grabbed his briefcase. I'll send movers for my things on Saturday. Don't make this difficult. I won't, she said. I won't be here on Saturday. Richard paused at the door. What does that mean? Going to your mother's in Oregon. Something like that, Catherine said. Goodbye, Richard. He walked out the door. He didn't look back. He got into his Porsche, revved the engine, and sped down the long, winding driveway. He felt a rush of euphoria. He was free. He dialed Jessica's number. It's done, he told her, grinning, as the windshield wipers fought the rain. I told her, I'm coming to you. Back in the house, Catherine Elmira stood in the silence. She didn't cry. She walked to the security panel on the wall and typed in the code to disable the cameras. Then she walked to the kitchen, pulled a burner phone from the back of the pantry behind the flour jar, and dialed a number. He's gone, she said into the phone. Start the clock. For the first 48 hours, Richard Elmira lived in a fantasy. The condo in downtown Seattle was a sleek industrial bachelor pad he had kept as a rental investment, or so he had told Catherine. In reality, it had been his love nest with Jessica for the past 8 months. Jessica was ecstatic. She was a vibrant, fiery redhead with a laugh that filled the room, a stark contrast to Catherine's quiet reserve. They ordered takeout, drank expensive wine, and talked about the future. Jessica wanted to remodel the Bellevue house once Catherine was gone. She wanted to tear down the walls Catherine had painted, sage green. She wanted to host parties. Did she cry? Jessica asked, tracing circles on Richard's chest as they lay in bed on Wednesday morning. Surprisingly, no. Richard mused, staring at the ceiling. She was cold. Resigned, maybe. Catherine has always been pragmatic. Good, Jessica purred. Maybe she'll sign the papers quickly. We can be married by summer. By Thursday afternoon, however, the euphoria began to fray at the edges. Richard needed his birth certificate and his passport. He had forgotten them in the safe in the master bedroom closet at the Bellevue house. He also realized he had left his favorite set of architectural drafting pens. He texted Catherine coming by around 4 to pick up some documents. Please have the safe open. No reply. He texted again at 3 p.m. Cat, answer me. I don't want a scene. Still nothing. She's probably sulking, Jessica said, scrolling through Instagram on the sofa. Or she's at her mother's, like she said. She usually confirms, Richard muttered. A tiny prick of unease settled in his stomach. Not worry for her, worry for him. What if she was damaging his property? What if she was cutting up his suits? He drove to the house in the rain. The sky was a bruise of purple and grey. When he pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. The landscaping lights hadn't turned on, which was odd. They were on an automatic timer. He unlocked the front door. Catherine. Silence. The house was freezing. The thermostat had been turned off. He walked into the kitchen. The breakfast dishes from Tuesday were washed and put away. The counters were gleaming. It looked like a model home. It looked like no one lived there. He went upstairs to the master bedroom. The bed was made with military precision. He walked to the closet. Empty. Not just empty of her clothes, empty of everything. Catherine's side of the closet was bare. No dresses, no shoes, no hangers. But then he looked at his side. His suits were there. But his casual clothes, gone. His watches, gone. He rushed to the wall safe. It was open. Inside, where he kept his emergency cash, about $50,000 in bundles, there was nothing. His passport was gone. His birth certificate was gone. The deed to the house was gone. What the hell? Richard whispered. He ran to the bathroom. Her toiletries were gone, but so was his razor. So was his cologne. Panic began to rise, hot and acrid in his throat. This wasn't a woman leaving her husband. This was an evacuation. He pulled out his phone and called her cell. The number you have reached is no longer in service. He froze. He dialed again. The number you have reached. Disconnected, he said aloud. It's been 2 days. He called her mother, Ruth, in Oregon. Ruth was a sweet, slightly deaf woman who adored Richard because he paid for her assisted living facility. Hi, Ruth, it's Richard. Richard. How lovely. Is Catherine with you? I haven't heard from her for our Sunday call. Richard's grip on the phone tightened. She didn't call you on Sunday. No, dear. Is everything all right? Yes, fine, just busy. Goodbye, Ruth. He hung up. Catherine spoke to her mother every Sunday without fail. But last Sunday, 2 days before he dumped her, she hadn't called. He went back downstairs, his heart hammering. He walked into his home office. His computer was there, but the external hard drive, the one containing all the backups for his firm's current projects, the one he kept at home for safety, was missing. On the desk, right in the center, was a single envelope. It was cream-colored heavy stock. His name was written on it in Catherine's elegant looped handwriting. Richard. He tore it open. Inside was a single index card. It didn't say, I hate you. It didn't say, goodbye. It listed 3 things. 1. A date, August 14th, 2011. 2. A location, Pier 54. 3. A number 750,000. Richard stared at the card, his blood turning to ice. His knees gave way, and he sat heavily in his leather chair. August 14th, 2011. The night a young intern at his firm had accidentally fallen from a construction site at Pier 54. It was ruled a tragic accident, an OSHA violation that Richard had paid a hefty fine for. But the number, 750,000. That was the exact amount in cash he had paid a witness to disappear. A witness who saw that the intern hadn't fallen. She had been pushed during an argument with Richard. Catherine knew. She had known for 12 years. Oh my God, Richard whispered. Suddenly the front door chime echoed through the silent house. Ding dong. Richard jumped. He looked at the security monitor on his desk. Standing on the front porch were 2 uniformed police officers. Richard scrambled to hide the note in his pocket. He smoothed his hair, trying to compose himself. He opened the front door. "Richard Elmira?" the older officer asked. He had a badge that read, Sergeant Miller. "Yes." "We received a call requesting a welfare check on a Catherine Elmira. Her employer at the library said she hasn't shown up for 3 days and isn't answering her phone." Richard swallowed hard. She left. We separated on Tuesday. She went to her mother's." Sergeant Miller looked at his partner, then back at Richard. "We just got off the phone with her mother, sir. She says she hasn't seen Catherine in 6 months. The officer stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "And, sir, why is there bleach on your shoe?" Richard looked down. On the toe of his expensive Italian leather loafer was a small white spot. He had no idea where it came from. I don't know," Richard stammered. "Do you mind if we come in?" "Mr. Elmira?" Miller asked. It wasn't really a question. As Richard stepped aside to let them in, he realized with a dawning horror Catherine hadn't just left. She was setting the stage for the performance of a lifetime. And Richard was the villain she had written into the script. Sergeant Miller was a man who had seen it all in 20 years on the Seattle force, and he had a nose for hinky. And Richard Elmira, he smelled hinky. Richard stood in the foyer of his glass mansion, sweat prickling under his collar, despite the chill. "Bleach," he repeated, staring at the white spot on his shoe. The cleaning lady. She must have spilled something when she was here on Monday. I walked through it. Your cleaning service log shows they come on Fridays. Mr. Elmira," Miller said, glancing at a notepad. He had done his homework before knocking. "Today is Thursday." "I might have done some cleaning myself," Richard lied. It was a weak lie. Richard Elmira hadn't held a mop since 1998. "Mind if we look around just to verify she's not here, injured?" Miller asked. Richard wanted to say no. He wanted to scream, "Get out." But he knew how that looked. "Go ahead. I have nothing to hide. My wife left me. That's not a crime." The officers moved through the house with practiced efficiency. They checked the living room, the kitchen, the garage. Richard followed them, his hand gripping the index card in his pocket, so tight the corners were cutting into his skin. Pier 54. 750,000. Mr. Elmira. The younger officer, Officer Chen, called from the laundry room. Richard's stomach dropped. He walked down the hall. Officer Chen was pointing at the utility sink. It was a deep, stainless steel basin. At the bottom, near the drain, was a reddish-brown smear. And next to the sink, a bottle of Clorox bleach sat on the counter, the cap missing. "Is that blood, sir?" Chen asked. Richard stared. He had never seen that stain before. I cut my finger yesterday. While packing." He held up his hands. They were perfectly manicured, not a scratch on them. Miller stepped in, close invading Richard's personal space. "You cut your finger. Which one? It healed." Richard snapped, realizing how stupid he sounded. "Look, what are you implying? Catherine walked out of here on Tuesday night. She was fine. Ask my girlfriend. I was with her all night, Tuesday and Wednesday." "Your girlfriend," Miller said flatly. "So there's a mistress involved. The plot thickens." "I moved out," Richard said defensively. "Catherine was angry, but she was alive. We're going to need to bring the crime scene techs in, Mr. Elmira," Miller said, his voice hardening. "And we're going to need you to come down to the station for a statement." "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet. But your wife is missing. There's possible blood in your laundry room, and you have bleach on your shoes." Let's call it a highly encouraged invitation. As Richard was escorted out of his own house, he saw his neighbours, the Hendersons, peeking through their curtains. The shame was immediate, hot and flushing. But beneath the shame was confusion. He hadn't killed Catherine. He hadn't hurt a hair on her head. So where did the blood come from? One hour later, Seattle Police Department, Interrogation Room B. Richard sat in the metal chair, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He had called Bianca Pree, his lawyer. Pree was on his way, screaming at Richard over the phone to keep his mouth shut. But Richard couldn't stop thinking about the index card. August 14th, 2011. If Catherine told the police about the intern, about the payoff, he wouldn't just lose his reputation. He would go to prison for manslaughter. Or murder. The door opened. It wasn't Miller. It was a woman in a sharp blazer. Detective Laura Vance. She was known as the Iron Maiden of the Missing Persons Unit. "Mr. Almira," she said, sitting down and opening a file. "Let's talk about your finances. My lawyer isn't here yet." This isn't a legal question, really. It's a curiosity. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of his joint bank account with Catherine. On Tuesday morning, $250,000 was transferred from your joint savings to a crypto wallet. Did you authorize that? Richard blinked. What? No. That's impossible. I would get an alert. The alert was sent to Catherine's email, Vance said, and the crypto wallet, it's untraceable. But here's the kicker. The transfer was authorized using your biometric login, your fingerprint. "I didn't do it," Richard shouted. "Were you drunk on Tuesday morning?" "I was at work." Or maybe, Vance leaned in. "You and Catherine had a fight. You killed her to stop her from taking half your assets in a divorce. You tried to clean up the mess, hence the bleach, and you moved the money to make it look like she ran away." "That's insane." Richard stood up. "I have a witness, Jessica Morrow." "Ah, the Mistress." Vance smiled coldly. "We're bringing her in now. Let's see if her story matches yours." Jessica Morrow was not built for interrogation rooms. She was built for rooftop bars and designer showrooms. Sitting in the small grey room, she looked like an exotic bird trapped in a cardboard box. She was wearing a white cashmere coat that probably cost more than Detective Vance's car. "I don't understand why I'm here," Jessica said, her voice trembling. Richard said Catherine went to her mother's. Detective Vance sat opposite her, looking bored. "Jessica, how long have you been sleeping with Richard Almira?" 8 months. But we're in love. He left her for me." "Did he?" Vance tapped her pen on the table. "Or did he get rid of her for you?" "Get rid of—" "No." Jessica looked horrified. "Richard isn't violent. He's an architect. He draws buildings." "We found blood in their laundry room, Jessica, and bleach on his shoe." Jessica's face went pale. The confidence drained out of her. "Blood. Tell me about Tuesday night," Vance commanded. "Every detail. If you lie, you're an accessory to murder. That's 25 to life, honey. That cashmere coat won't look good in orange." Jessica started to cry. He came to the condo around 8 p.m. He was happy. He said he did it. He said she was surprisingly calm. Did he change his clothes when he got there? Jessica paused. She sniffed, wiping her eyes. Yes. Yes, he did. He went straight to the shower. He put his suit in a plastic bag. He said he spilled wine on it. Vance's eyes lit up. He bagged his suit. Where is it now? He threw it down the trash chute in the hallway. He said he didn't want to bother with the dry cleaner because he wanted to start fresh. Vance stood up. Stay here, Jessica. She walked out into the hall where Miller was waiting. Get a team to the dumpsters behind Elmira's condo. Now, we're looking for a bagged suit. If there's blood on it, we've got him." Meanwhile, somewhere on the I-5 highway heading south, a grey Honda Civic older model, unremarkable in every way, merged into the slow lane. The driver was a woman with short, spiky blonde hair and thick-rimmed glasses. She wore a baggy sweatshirt and chewed gum aggressively. No one would have recognized Catherine Elmira. She glanced at the passenger seat. There was a burner phone and a laptop. She wasn't going to her mother's. Catherine had spent the last year meticulously crafting a new identity. The blonde hair was a wig she had bought in Vancouver 3 months ago. The car was purchased with cash from a private seller in Tacoma under the name Mary Alice. She turned up the radio. The local news was on. Police are investigating the suspicious disappearance of Bellevue socialite Catherine Elmira. Her husband, prominent architect Richard Elmira, is currently being questioned. Catherine smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile. She remembered the blood. It had been easy. She had been storing her own blood for weeks. A nurse friend, an old college roommate who owed her a massive favor, had shown her how to draw a pint safely. She had frozen it in bags behind the frozen peas. On Tuesday night after Richard left, she had thawed one bag. She smeared it in the sink. She put a drop on his shoe while he was sleeping on the couch the Sunday prior, knowing he rarely wore those shoes, and wouldn't notice a tiny spot until it was too late. She had hacked his phone to authorize the money transfer. She had planted the seeds of his destruction with the precision of a master architect. Richard built houses. Catherine built narratives. But she wasn't done yet. The index card was just the jab. The knockout punch was still coming. She reached over and flipped open the laptop. She pulled into a rest stop connected to the public Wi-Fi using a VPN that routed her signal through Brazil. She opened an email draft she had prepared weeks ago. It was addressed to the Seattle Times investigative desk. Subject: the Pier 54. Cover-up. Evidence attached. Attached was a scanned copy of a ledger she had found in Richard's safe years ago. It showed payments to a building inspector. It showed the falsified safety reports. And she added one more thing. A video file. It was a recording from the security camera inside their home from Tuesday night. But it was edited. Deep-faked audio. In the video, Richard was yelling, "I'll kill you if you touch my money, Catherine. You'll never leave this house alive." She had spent months using AI voice synthesis software, feeding it hours of Richard's podcasts and interviews to create a perfect voice clone. She hovered her finger over the send button. "You wanted drama, Richard," she whispered. "You wanted a younger, more exciting life. Well, buckle up." She hit send. Bianca Pri was not a nice man. He was, however, an exceptionally expensive lawyer, the kind who wore shark-skin suits that seemed less like a fashion choice and more like camouflage. He sat across from Richard Elmira in the county jail visitation room. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale fear. They found the suit Richard Pri said not bothering to sugarcoat it. He arranged his gold pen on the metal table. "It was in the dumpster behind your condo, just like your little girlfriend said. And guess what? It's covered in type O negative blood. Catherine's blood type. DNA confirmation came back an hour ago." Richard put his head in his hands. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. His designer stubble had grown into a ragged beard. "I didn't do it, Bianca. I swear. I threw the suit away because I spilled Merlot on it. It was a 2018 Cabernet. The police don't care about the vintage Richard. They care that it looks like you butchered your wife, showered, bagged the evidence, and went to bed with your mistress." Pri leaned forward. And now there's the email. Richard looked up, eyes bloodshot. What email? The Seattle Times just ran a breaking story. Architect of Deceit, they're calling it. Documents regarding the Pier 54 accident in 2011. And a video. A security video of you threatening to kill Catherine. Richard's jaw dropped. I never threatened to kill her. We argued, yes, but I never said those words. The video says otherwise. Millions of people have seen it on YouTube in the last 3 hours. You are officially the most hated man in the Pacific Northwest. Pri paused, his eyes narrowing. But here is where it gets interesting. Pri pulled a tablet out of his briefcase. He played the video. It was grainy black and white footage of the Elmira living room. Richard's voice boomed out. I'll kill you if you touch my money, Catherine. You'll never leave this house alive. That's not me, Richard whispered. That sounds like me. But the cadence, it's wrong. I know, Pri said smoothly. Because I know you, Richard. You're a narcissist and a cheater, but you're not a screamer. You're passive-aggressive. This man in the video, he's a brute. Pri tapped the screen. And there's something else. My private investigator Frank Cole, you remember Frank, the ex-FBI agent, he ran the audio through a spectral analyzer. And in the background of the recording, faint under your voice, there is a sound, a rhythmic chugging. A train. Richard frowned. We don't live near the train tracks. The nearest line is 5 miles away from the Bellevue house. Exactly. Pri smiled, a row of veneered teeth appearing like a trap springing shut. But you know who lives near the train tracks, the rental property you own in Georgetown? The one you let Catherine use for her art studio that she claimed she never went to. Richard sat up straighter. She hasn't been there in years. It's full of old furniture. Frank went there this morning, Pri said. He broke in. Illegal, of course, but necessary. He found a soundproof booth, high-end recording equipment, and a whiteboard with a timeline written on it. Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the jail air conditioning. A timeline. It detailed everything, Richard. Tuesday, the breakup. Wednesday, the bleach. Thursday, the leak. She planned it. She didn't just disappear. She produced a movie, and you're the star. So I'm free? Richard asked, hope surging in his chest. No. Pri slammed the folder shut. Because the police think the studio is where you killed her. They think you staged the studio to look like a frame-up. The narrative is set. The public wants your head on a spike. To get you out, we don't just need to prove she faked it. We need to find her, alive. Pri stood up. I posted your bail. $2 million. You're out. But you're wearing an ankle monitor. Go back to the condo. Don't talk to the press. Don't talk to Jessica. She's cooperating with the DA to save her own skin, by the way. She told them you have a temper. Richard stood, his legs shaky. Where is she? Bianca, where is Catherine? That Pri said, checking his Rolex, is the $5 million question. Frank found a receipt in the studio trash for a wig, purchased in Vancouver, and a car manual for a 2005 Honda Civic. She's running, Richard said. No, Pri corrected. She's watching, and she's waiting for the finale, 300 miles south, in a roadside motel just outside of Eureka, California. Catherine Elmira sat on a lumpy mattress, eating a vending machine sandwich. Her laptop cast a blue glow on her face. She wasn't Catherine right now. She was Mary Alice. Her blonde wig was itchy, and she missed her silk pillowcases, but the adrenaline was better than any luxury. She watched the news stream. There was Richard walking out of the precinct, surrounded by a swarm of microphones. He looked broken. He looked terrified. Good, she thought. Feel it. Feel the helplessness. She scrolled down to the comment section. Lock him up. Justice for Catherine. I hope he rots. It was intoxicating. For 15 years she had been the invisible wife, the one who organized the dinner parties while Richard flirted with the guests, the one who balanced the books while Richard spent the profits. Now the whole world knew her name. They loved her. They mourned her. She opened the bank account she had set up in the Cayman Islands. The $250,000 she had transferred was there safe. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start over in Mexico. She had a contact in Guadalajara who could get her a new passport. But then she saw a headline that made her pause. Defense lawyer claims deepfake evidence in Almira case. Catherine frowned. She clicked the link. Bianca Pri was giving a statement on the courthouse steps. My client is the victim of a high-tech smear campaign, Pri shouted over the reporters. The audio released today contains background noise from a location Richard Almira has not visited in 6 months. This was pre-recorded. This was staged. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. The train. She had forgotten the train. The soundproofing in the Georgetown studio wasn't perfect. She slammed the laptop shut. Pri was good. She had forgotten how good he was. She stood up and paced the small, dingy room. She needed to move. She couldn't stay in one place for more than a night. She grabbed her burner phone to check the GPS route to the border. She turned it on. Immediately, a text message popped up. It wasn't a notification. It was a direct text. From an unknown number. Nice wig, Catherine, but blonde doesn't suit your complexion. Catherine dropped the phone as if it were red hot. It clattered onto the linoleum floor. She stared at it. How this was a burner. She had paid cash. No one had this number except... She realized her mistake. The nurse friend. Sarah. The woman who had drawn her blood. Sarah, who swore she would take the secret to her grave. The phone buzzed again. Pri's investigator offered me $50,000 for the name of the person I drew blood for. I have kids, Kat. College is expensive. You have 1 hour before I give them your license plate number. Catherine couldn't breathe. The walls of the motel room seemed to be closing in. Her perfect plan, her masterpiece, was crumbling because of the one thing she hadn't calculated: greed. Everyone had a price. Richard had a price. The building inspector had a price. And now Sarah. She grabbed her duffel bag. She didn't bother packing the toothbrush. She grabbed the keys to the Honda. She burst out of the room into the cool California night. The motel parking lot was dimly lit. She ran to the Honda Civic. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. She got the door open and threw her bag in. As she slid into the driver's seat, she saw it. In the rear-view mirror. A pair of headlights turned on at the far end of the parking lot. A black SUV. It had been sitting there, engine off, waiting. The SUV didn't accelerate. It just flashed its high beams once. A signal. I see you. It wasn't the police. The police would have swarmed her with sirens wailing. This was Frank Cole, Pri's hunter. Catherine locked the doors. She started the engine. She wasn't going to Mexico anymore. If she ran, Cole would follow. If she was caught, she would go to prison for fraud, embezzlement, and wasting police time. Richard would win. He would play the victim, write a book, and probably marry Jessica. No. Catherine gripped the steering wheel. Her eyes hardened behind the thick glasses. She wasn't going to run. She was going to finish the story. But she had to change the ending. She put the car in reverse, spun out of the parking spot, and didn't head for the highway south. She turned north, back toward Seattle. If Richard wanted a confrontation, she would give him one. But it wouldn't be in a courtroom. It would be at the place where all his secrets were buried. She dialed the number for Detective Laura Vance. This is Detective Vance. Hello, Detective. Catherine said, her voice dropping the Mary Alice disguise and returning to its cool, cultured steel. "This is Catherine Elmira. I'd like to report a kidnapping. My own." The rain had turned violent, lashing against the windshield of an 18-wheeler heading north on the I-5, just past the city limits of Tacoma. The driver, a weary man named Earl, was thinking about coffee when he saw it. A figure stumbled out of the tree line and onto the shoulder of the highway. It was a woman. She was barefoot in the mud, wearing a torn grey sweatshirt that hung off her frame like a shroud. Her hands were bound in front of her with heavy-duty black zip ties. She waved frantically, her movements jerky and desperate before collapsing onto the wet asphalt. Earl slammed on his brakes, the truck screeching to a halt. He grabbed his CB radio, his voice cracking with panic. "This is Breaker 19. I got an emergency. I got a woman on the side of the road, looks like she's been through hell. Mile marker 134. Send the cops. Send everyone." By the time the paramedics cut the zip ties off her wrists, Catherine Elmira wasn't just a missing person anymore. She was the breaking news story of the decade. The interrogation room observation deck, 3 hours later. Richard Elmira stood behind the one-way mirror of interrogation room A. He felt as if his body had been filled with lead. Next to him, his lawyer Bianca Pree was unusually silent. Detective Laura Vance stood with her arms crossed her eyes, flicking between Richard and the woman in the room. Catherine sat at the metal table, wrapped in a coarse police-issue blanket. She held a styrofoam cup of lukewarm water with both hands to stop them from shaking. A small, ugly bruise was blooming on her left cheekbone, a masterstroke of makeup artistry she had applied in the motel bathroom, or perhaps a real injury she had inflicted upon herself. With Catherine, the line between performance and reality had ceased to exist. "Walk us through it one more time, Mrs. Elmira," Officer Miller said, gently sitting across from her. "Take your time." Catherine took a shuddering breath. The microphone in the room picked up the wet sound of her inhale. "I was leaving," she whispered, her voice a broken rasp. "Tuesday night, I was just going to drive to the coast to clear my head. I pulled over at a rest stop near Olympia to check my tires. A van pulled up behind me. A black van." Richard leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass. "There was no van," he hissed. "She drove to a motel." "She's lying." "Quiet," Vance commanded, not looking at him. "A man got out." Catherine continued a tear slipping down her nose. "He was wearing a ski mask. He grabbed me. I tried to fight, but he had a needle. I felt a pinch in my neck, and then everything went black." She pulled down the collar of her sweatshirt. There on the side of her neck was a small, angry red puncture mark. Richard's blood ran cold. She had thought of everything. "When I woke up," Catherine said, staring into the middle distance, "I was in a room. No windows, just a mattress. He kept me there for days. He didn't speak much. But when he did, he talked about Richard." Miller leaned in. "What did he say about your husband?" Catherine looked directly at the mirror. It was impossible for her to see him, yet Richard felt her gaze bore into his skull. "He said..." Catherine's voice trembled, then hardened. "He said Richard wanted a clean slate. He said divorce was too messy and too expensive. He told me that my husband paid him $50,000 to make sure I never came back to Bellevue." "That is a lie!" Richard screamed, slamming his fist against the glass. The sound echoed in the small observation room, but the soundproofing kept the interrogation room silent. "I never hired anyone. I am innocent." "Stop it, Richard," Bianca Pree said, his voice tight. "You're making it worse." "How can I make it worse? She is framing me for a kidnapping that never happened." Detective Vance turned slowly to face Richard. Her expression was no longer one of suspicion. It was one of cold, hard certainty. "Mr. Elmira, we found your wife half dead on the side of the highway. She has needle marks. She has ligature marks on her wrists that suggest she was bound for days. And her story matches the timeline perfectly." "It's a story," Richard pleaded. "Check the GPS on her car." "We did," Vance said. "Her car was found in a ravine 5 miles from where she was recovered. Torched. No GPS data available." Richard staggered back. She had destroyed the Honda. She had destroyed the evidence. "But there's something else," Vance said, reaching for a file on the console. "We showed Mrs. Elmira a photo lineup of known associates and private investigators." Richard froze. "Why private investigators?" "Because," Vance said, "we picked up a man near the drop site. He was sitting in a black SUV, seemingly monitoring the police response. His name is Frank Cole." Bianca Pri let out a low groan and covered his face with his hand. "Frank," Richard stammered. "Frank works for Bianca. He was looking for her." "That's one interpretation," Vance said. "Here is another. Mrs. Elmira just identified Frank Cole as the man in the ski mask." Inside the interrogation room, Catherine pointed a shaking finger at a photo on the table. "That's him," she sobbed. "That's the man who took me. I remember his eyes." "Frank Cole was tracking her because we paid him to find her," Richard yelled. "Of course his GPS puts him near her. That proves nothing." "It proves opportunity," Vance countered. "And then there's the money. We found a wire transfer of $50,000 from your offshore account to a shell company registered to Frank Cole's wife. The transfer happened on Tuesday morning." Richard felt the floor tilt. "I didn't authorize that transfer. I told you I was hacked. A hack that pays your lawyer's investigator the exact amount your wife claims was the bounty on her head." Vance shook her head. "That's beyond coincidence, Mr. Elmira. That is a smoking gun." The door to the observation room opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped in. "Richard Elmira." Vance said, her voice official and void of pity. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, solicitation of murder and fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Richard looked through the glass one last time. Catherine was sipping her water. She looked calm now. The tears had stopped instantly. She was no longer the victim. She was the architect, and she had just laid the final brick in the wall that would imprison him. The holding cell. 6 hours later, the adrenaline had faded, leaving Richard shivering on a concrete bench. His tuxedo shirt, the one he had worn to the station, thinking he would be vindicated, was wrinkled and stained with sweat. The heavy steel door clanged open. Bianca Pri walked in. The sharkskin suit looked dull under the harsh fluorescent lights. Pri didn't sit down. He stood by the door, clutching his briefcase like a shield. "It's over, Richard," Pri said flatly. "Get me out on bail, Bianca. Use the house. Use the stocks." "The assets are frozen," Pri said, "and bail is denied. You're a flight risk with offshore accounts, but that's not the worst of it. What could possibly be worse? Frank Cole cracked." Richard's eyes widened. "What?" "They offered Frank a deal. 10 years for kidnapping, or 5 if he flips on the mastermind. Frank didn't kidnap anyone, and he knows it. But he also knows he can't prove he didn't. His GPS puts him at the scene. The money is in his account. Catherine identified him. He's scared, Richard, so he told them what they wanted to hear. He signed a statement saying you hired him to abduct Catherine. He's lying to save himself." "Does it matter?" Pri asked. "We have the victim testifying against you. We have the accomplice testifying against you. We have the blood in the laundry room. We have the video of you threatening her. No jury in America will acquit you. You're looking at 20 years to life." Richard put his head in his hands. He wept. Not for Catherine, not for the marriage, but for the life of luxury that was slipping through his fingers like sand. However, Pri said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "There is an alternative." Richard looked up, wiping his nose. "What?" "Catherine's attorney contacted me. She doesn't want a trial. She says she's too traumatized to face you in court. She has offered a civil compromise, a plea deal that bypasses the criminal courts, provided the district attorney agrees, which they will, because they don't want to risk a media circus if the Pier 54 evidence surfaces." "Pier 54, Richard whispered. The number 750,000 flashed in his mind. She knows, Richard. She has the original safety reports. She has the proof that you bribed the inspector. If that comes out, you don't go to prison for kidnapping. You go to prison for manslaughter. And there is no statute of limitations on that when there's a cover-up involved." "What does she want?" Richard asked, his voice dead. Pri opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "She wants everything." Richard laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "Define everything." "She wants the Bellevue house, the downtown condo, the portfolio, the cars, the rights to your firm's intellectual property." "So I'm homeless?" "Not quite. She is leaving you the rental apartment in Tacoma, the one above the bowling alley." Pri paused. "And she is demanding 80% of your future gross earnings for the next 15 years as restitution for emotional distress. 80%, that's slavery." "It's freedom," Pri corrected. "If you signed this, she recants the kidnapping identification. She tells the DA she was confused, that it was a random act, that Frank Cole wasn't the man. The kidnapping charges against you drop. The attempted murder charges drop. You walk out of here tonight. And if I don't sign, then she releases the Pier 54 documents to the press tomorrow morning. You go to prison for the rest of your life, and you die branded as a killer." Richard stared at the document. It was a death sentence, just a different kind. It was the death of his ego, the death of his status. He would be a worker drone, toiling away to fund the lifestyle of the woman who had destroyed him. He thought about Jessica. He hadn't heard from her once. He thought about his friends at the club. They were probably toasting his downfall right now. He thought about Catherine, the quiet woman he had ignored for 15 years. He had underestimated her silence. He had mistaken patience for weakness. He realized now, too late, that Catherine was the true architect in the family. He only built houses. She built realities. "Do you have a pen?" Richard asked. Pri handed him a gold Mont Blanc pen, a gift Richard had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. Richard took the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line, "Richard J. Almira." He signed. The ink was black and permanent. "Done," Richard whispered, dropping the pen. Pri picked up the document, checking the signature. "I'll file this with the DA. You should be processed out in a few hours." Pri walked to the door, then paused. He looked back at his former client, sitting slumped on the bench, a broken man in a ruined suit. "You know, Richard," Pri said thoughtfully, "I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I've seen killers, thieves, and con artists, but I have never seen anyone played as thoroughly as you." "Get out," Richard said. Pri tapped the door. The guard opened it. As the heavy steel door slammed shut, echoing with the finality of a coffin lid, Richard Almira was left alone in the silence. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine the view from his Bellevue balcony, the way the light hit the water. But all he could see was Catherine's face, smiling that small, sad smile. She had warned him. "Remember that I gave you a chance to stop." He hadn't stopped, and now he would never stop paying. And that is the terrifying story of the Almira disappearance. In the end, Richard paid for his betrayal not with jail time, but with his life's work. He became a prisoner of his own secrets, while Catherine turned her vengeance into a fortune. It makes you wonder, how well do you really know the person you're sharing a life with? And if you have skeletons in your closet, you better make sure you're the only one with the key. If this story sent a chill down your spine, hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. What do you think? Was Catherine a genius or a villain? Or did Richard deserve everything he got? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We upload real-life drama and mysteries every week. Until next time, watch your back.